Hello, my name is Joshua Plick, and today we will be covering the introduction to JavaScript functions. And there's pretty much 5 general ideas that will cover the foundation of understanding what a JavaScript function is and how to use them. We'll first cover defining a function, and then we'll go over how to call functions, passing default parameters to functions, scoping of local variables inside of functions and global variables or variables outside of the scope of the function. And then finally, we will discover how to pass functions around as arguments to other functions. A JavaScript function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task. Let's start off with a JavaScript statement. So let's say const sum equals 2 plus 3. And then let's console.log that value. And here we can see the result of that, which is 5. This is nice. So we're going to convert this JavaScript statement and we're going to turn it into a function. We will go over the syntax as we go along. So let's define a function, sum, and let's throw this information, or let's throw this stuff inside of the function. And then we call the function as so, and we get 5. So if we have a sum function and it always returns 5, it's not very useful because it's not reusable. Functions get all of their power from being dynamic. They take in different values and you can get different results, which makes them reusable. So let's go over the 3 parts of a function. Step 1 is that it takes in data. We will call these parameters. So if we were to make this dynamic, we need to make sum take in 2 parameters, 2 numbers. So we'll say first number and second number. In order to actually pass values to this parameter, we will pass it what are called arguments. So we'll do sum2, 3. And so when you pass 2 as the first variable inside of this sum function, it'll get assigned to the first number parameter. And when you assign the second argument, the number 3, to the second space in this sum function, it'll get assigned to this parameter second number. So we can make this more dynamic by renaming this to first number, and we can redefine this to second number, and we get 5. Let's actually change these numbers to confirm that it's actually more dynamic now. 3 plus 4 is returning 7. So now we've got something that is much more powerful, and this is the heart and soul of why functions are so great in JavaScript, because we now have something that is dynamic and we can get different results from different inputs. If we comment out this line, what you'll notice is that the console.log is not actually being logged at all. The reason why is because we've defined this function, but we have not called it or invoked it. So when we actually you define a function with the function syntax and the name of the function, but you actually call it on a separate line, sum3, 4. So let's go over these first 3 steps. So it takes in data, which is parameter 1 and parameter 2. It does work on that data, which is it adding first number and second number, and then it returns the result. So we're actually going to make this dynamic. Instead of console.logging here, we're going to make this a return. Return sum, and then we're going to do console.log sum of 3 and 4. So that's going to give us 7. Now, if we don't return from the function, it's going to default to returning undefined. So if you're expecting a result from a function, you have to always remember to put the return syntax. And interestingly enough, any line that happens after that, like let's say we even throw an error, right? Yeah, throw some error. It will never reach this line because it's being returned before it reaches that line. Let's jump into an exercise now that we have some knowledge about functions. I would like you to calculate a bill at a restaurant. What the function is going to take is, it's going to be called calculate bill. Function is calculate bill. it's going to take in 3 parameters, which is the bill amount, the tax rate, and the tip rate. And it should return the total after you have all 3 of those things. Would you help me out with that?
Sure. All right. So I am going to look at. Do I have control? I do. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So I'm going to start typing into my window. I have to create a function called calculate bill. Let's calculate bill, and it takes 3 values. What are those? Bill, amount, tax rate, and tip rate. And I can say bill amount plus tax. Oh no, not plus, sorry. Oh yeah, bill amount times tax rate,
right,
plus bill amount times tip rate, and semicolon, I guess. And I want to put that inside the function. So I have to put curly braces, right?
Right.
Oops, I went outside. So let me delete this and close curly braces. So I have the function calculate bill with all these 3 things. Still red. I don't know why it's red.
So the reason why it's red is you're just missing, like if you look at line 7, you have to put the function syntax before you define a function to say, hey, this is a function.
Okay, you're right. Function. And now it's taking those 3 things. It's still showing yellow squigglies.
So why don't you try console.log and calculate bill and passing in some values.
Console.log, and I will call calculate bill, and so calculate bill is, let's say my total is $20, tax rate 7%, and tip rate 15%. Oops, what did I just do? I messed up something. Okay, yeah, 15%.
All right. Yeah, so in JavaScript, it doesn't like that percent syntax, 7%. You have to make that a decimal instead.
Oh, okay. Decimal. So 0.07 like that?
Yes, sir.
All right, 15% also. Okay, I'm messing up. Sorry. Okay, 15%, yes. 0.15. All right, so that looks good.
Right, and so you're still getting one more issue. You're getting a warning on line 21 because you're not returning the result there. Okay. A function's always going to return undefined.
Oh, okay.
Unless you put a return in there.
Yeah, that's why it's showing undefined here. Okay, so I type return. Okay.
All right, 24.4.
Good, good, good.
One thing. So something that I'm seeing here with this return, it's useful to indent your code with 2 spaces there. You're communicating to yourself and to other developers that, hey, this code lives inside of this function. I don't know what happened there. Oh, I folded it. You're saying, hey, this code lives inside of this function. And that's what, indenting is really important. It's a good professional practice because it communicates that the code is inside of that function. So let's say you wanted to do something very, very particular. Let's say your tip rate all the time, typically you do 15%. You might change it every once in a while. You might do 18% or 20%. But let's just say 80, 90% of the time you always tip 15%. In JavaScript, there's an interesting concept called a default parameter where you can say tip rate equals 0.15. And you can actually not pass in the tip rate, and it'll take the default. If you don't pass in tip rate, it'll actually take the default of 0.15, and it will use that instead. So if we refresh, we still get the same value, but we still have the option of, if we want to be a big tipper, we can, if we choose to, tip 40%. And then we have the option of either using the default version or the explicit version where we can override the default and set our own default parameter, or set our own argument for tip rate. Let's say we had the total assigned to a variable. Const total equals this amount, and then we return the total. So we've got a variable defined inside of this function. What would happen if we tried to console.log that inner variable outside of the function? We have a reference error here saying that total is not defined. So within the scope of the function, within the block, which is defined by these two brackets, curly brackets, all variables defined inside only live inside of that function. They are not available. They are considered out of scope. If you're outside of that function, those variables are not available to you. They don't exist, essentially. So that's what's called local scope. All variables defined inside the function are not available outside of the function. In contrast, let's say we had another variable called name. Let's say it's my name, right? Say name is Josh. This is a variable defined outside of the scope of the function. And let's say I wanted to send the person a message who was tipping. Let's say Josh, or not Josh, it's dynamic, right? So we say name plus a space and then plus the total, comma, your total is plus total. Oh, we're still doing this. We comment that out. So in contrast, if we have a variable defined outside of the scope of the function, it is available to the scope of the function. It's available to the inner scope of the function because this is effectively a global variable that is available within its current context and the context of the function. But in contrast, any variables inside of the function are not available in the outer scope. All right, the last bit that we should cover is passing functions as arguments to other functions. So Jitesh, I'd like you to drive here. And so what we're going to create is a function that can greet you in Spanish or it can greet you in English. So we're going to create three functions. The first one is going to greet us in English. So let's make a function called hello.
Function hello.
Yep, it'll take in a name argument.
Okay, name.
So essentially, we've got this variable name on line 33 and on line 19. We've got the same name. This is what's called variable shadowing. We don't ever want to have the same variable in the outer scope and as in the inner scope. Mm-hmm. So let's just get rid of line 19. Okay, so hello name, and then it should return a string of hello and the other person's name.
Okay.
And the person's name that you passed in.
All right. So return hello and then the name.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So why don't you just copy and paste this function, and we're going to do the same function in Spanish. We're just going to call it hola, and instead of saying hello, we're going to just call this hola, and it's going to say hola with the name. All right, so now here's where it gets interesting. We're going to make a function, let's call it greet. And we're going to pass it a name. And we're going to pass it, what do you think we should call this? Because we're going to be passing in the function. It's going to be hello or hola. It's going to be what it's essentially the greeting in English or Spanish. Maybe salutation?
Okay.
What do you think? Okay.
Salutation.
Okay, salutation. So let's open up the function.
Okay.
And so salutation is a function this time. So when we call it, we're not going to just be referring to it like we did on line 34 and 38, where it's just a name. We actually have to use parentheses. So let's just do return.
Okay, yeah, return.
Return salutation, and then pass in the name.
It's not working.
Okay, yeah, so we will need to put parentheses around that. because we're actually calling the salutation function that we're passing in.
So salutation is a parameter, but we are calling it?
That's right. We are passing in hello, or so it should make more sense when we actually call it. So if you add another line, let's do console.log, and then throw in greet, and put in a name for the first argument.
Josh. Okay.
And then the second argument, let's just pass in hello, which is the function on line 33.
Okay.
And so it says, if you look to the right, it says hello Josh. If you change that hello to hola, it should greet us in Spanish. So it's yeah, so what's interesting about this is not only can we pass strings and numbers to functions, we can also pass functions to functions, which is that means JavaScript is what's called a first-class function supported language, or it has first-class support for functions, and you can pass in functions and then execute them within other functions.
Great.